The morning sun rose over New Haven just like it had for the past 8 years. Jake Morrison stood at his office window watching the miners head out to the extraction sites in their heavy vehicles. The dust clouds followed behind them as they drove toward the distant hills where the precious metals waited underground. Jake had been the colony administrator since the first day they landed on this planet, and he loved watching his people work. New Haven was home to 12,000 settlers. Now, when they first arrived, there had been only 500 brave souls willing to leave Earth behind for a new life among the stars. The colony had grown slowly but steadily as more ships brought families and workers from the overcrowded cities back home. Children ran through the streets now, and their laughter filled the air during the day. Dr. Lisa Parker walked into Jake's office carrying her morning reports. She was the chief scientist for the colony and spent most of her time studying the planet and the space around it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were covered in dust from her early morning survey work. She placed the data pad on Jake's desk and pointed to the screen. The energy readings from the outer asteroid belt were strange again. Lisa had been tracking these unusual signals for 3 weeks now, and they were getting stronger. The patterns did not match anything they had seen before, and that worried her. She had run the data through every computer program they had, but nothing could explain what was causing the energy spikes. Jake looked at the numbers and frowned. He was not a scientist, but he had learned to trust Lisa's instincts over the years. She had predicted the earthquake that hit the southern settlements last year, and her warning had saved many lives. If she said something was wrong, then something was probably wrong. Danny Brooks burst through the office door without knocking. The young communications officer was breathing hard, and his face was pale with worry. He had been working the night shift at the communications center when the messages started coming in. Fragments of distress calls from other human colonies in nearby star systems had been reaching them for the past few hours. The messages were broken and hard to understand. Static filled most of the transmissions, and only pieces of words came through clearly. Danny had heard the words help and attack repeated several times, but he could not make sense of the full messages. The colonies that were supposed to check in with them every week had gone silent one by one over the past month. Captain Roy Stevens arrived at the meeting as Danny finished explaining the situation. Roy was head of colony security and had 30 years of military experience behind him. His gray hair and weathered face showed the stress of keeping 12,000 people safe on a frontier world. He listened to Danny's report, and his expression grew darker with each broken message. Roy had been worried about the communication blackouts for weeks. The regular supply ships from Earth were 3 months overdue, and no one could reach the central command stations in the inner colonies. Something was happening out there in space, and they were cut off from any news about it. His small security force was trained to handle pirates and equipment failures, but they were not prepared for anything bigger. The colony's defense systems were basic but functional. 6 orbital platforms circled the planet armed with particle cannons and missile launchers. 12 patrol ships based on the surface could respond to threats in the asteroid belt or escort supply convoys. The weapons were powerful enough to stop raiders or destroy dangerous asteroids, but Roy knew they would not be enough against a real military force. Lisa continued her explanation of the energy readings while Jake and Roy listened carefully. The signals seemed to be moving through the asteroid belt in patterns that looked almost like search sweeps. Whatever was out there was looking for something, and it was getting closer to New Haven every day. The intensity of the energy spikes suggested technology far beyond what humans had developed. Jake called an emergency meeting with the other department heads. Within an hour, the colony's leadership had gathered in the main conference room. Dr. Lisa Parker explained her findings while Danny Brooks shared the broken distress messages from other colonies. Captain Roy Stevens outlined their defensive capabilities and the growing threat they faced. The farming supervisor, Maria Garcia, reported that the crops were doing well and food stores were full for the winter season. The manufacturing chief, Tom Bell, said production was running smoothly and they had plenty of spare parts for essential systems. Everything in the colony was working perfectly, which made the growing crisis feel even more strange and threatening. Jake made the decision to put the colony on alert status. The defensive platforms would be fully manned and the patrol ships would increase their scouting missions. All civilians would be briefed on emergency procedures and the underground shelters would be checked and supplied. No one wanted to cause panic, but they needed to be ready for whatever was coming their way. The children continued playing in the streets as their parents went about their daily work. The miners kept digging in the hills and the farmers tended their crops under the alien sun. Life in New Haven looked normal on the surface, but everyone could feel the tension building like a storm approaching from space. The energy readings kept growing stronger and the communications blackout spread to more colonies each day. Evening came, and Jake stood at his window again watching the lights come on across the settlement. Families were having dinner and students were doing homework just like on any other night. The two small moons rose over the horizon and cast their silver light on the peaceful scene below. Jake wondered how much longer this quiet life would last and what tomorrow would bring to his people on their distant world. Admiral Crickstar stood on the command deck of his flagship watching the star charts update with new information. The massive ship stretched over 2 kilometers from nose to tail, and its crystalline hull gleamed with a pale blue light that came from the energy cores deep inside. 300 warships of the Zephyrian Empire followed behind him as they moved through hyperspace toward their target. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Their reptilian species had evolved on a harsh world where only the strongest survived, and they brought that same ruthless attitude to space. 17 different alien races had fallen before their fleets and been absorbed into the Empire as slave workers or soldiers. The Zephyrians saw themselves as the rightful masters of all worlds and all peoples. Crickstar had earned his rank through centuries of successful campaigns against lesser species. His scarred hide bore the marks of dozens of battles, and his cold yellow eyes had watched entire civilizations burn. The humans were just another infestation that needed to be cleaned out before they could spread too far into Zephyrian space. Intelligence reports suggested these mammals were weak and used primitive weapons that posed no real threat. The human colonies had appeared in this sector only 20 years ago, but they were multiplying like parasites. Their ships moved slowly through space, and their weapons seemed to rely on simple chemical explosives and metal projectiles. The Zephyrian scientists who studied human technology laughed at their crude fusion reactors and basic computer systems. These creatures would be easy to defeat and enslave. Commander Vex Newell approached the Admiral with the latest tactical reports. The Zephyrian fleet consisted of 300 ships ranging from massive battlecruisers to fast attack vessels. Each ship was armed with quantum energy cannons that could tear through most forms of matter and protected by shields that bent space itself around the hull. Their hyperspace drives allowed them to cross vast distances in hours rather than months. The target planet, called New Haven, showed signs of extensive mining operations and agricultural development. Orbital scans revealed 12,000 human civilians living in a single settlement with basic defensive systems. 6 small weapon platforms orbited the world and a handful of patrol craft were stationed on the surface. The defenses looked pathetic compared to what the Zephyrian fleet could bring to bear against them. Crickstar studied the images of the human colony with satisfaction. The settlement was well organized and the population seemed healthy, which would make them valuable as workers after they surrendered. The mining equipment could be useful, and the agricultural systems would help feed the growing Zephyrian war machine. Taking this world would be simple and profitable for the Empire. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Haven system in perfect formation. The massive ships blocked out the light from the local star as they moved toward the planet, with their weapons charged and ready. Crickstar opened a communication channel to the human colony and prepared to deliver his demand for immediate surrender. Most species gave up quickly when they saw the size of a Zephyrian battle fleet. Jake Morrison received the alien transmission in his office and felt his blood run cold as he looked at the creature on his screen. The reptilian face was covered in scars and the yellow eyes showed no emotion except cold calculation. Behind the alien commander, he could see other similar beings moving around what looked like the bridge of a warship. The translation software struggled to convert their hissing language into understandable words. The message was simple and direct. The humans had 30 minutes to surrender completely, or the colony would be destroyed from orbit. All weapons were to be powered down, and all ships were to remain grounded. The population would be processed for relocation to work camps in other parts of the Empire. Resistance would result in the immediate execution of all civilians, including children. Jake tried to respond, but the aliens cut the communication channel before he could speak. The enemy fleet was already moving closer to the planet, and their weapons were clearly visible as bright points of light along the hulls of their ships. Captain Roy Stevens ran into the office with reports from the orbital defense platforms. The alien vessels were unlike anything in human databases, and their energy signatures were off the charts. Dr. Lisa Parker had been monitoring the alien fleet since they arrived, and her readings confirmed their worst fears. The enemy ships used technology that was generations ahead of human science. Their power sources were incredibly advanced, and their weapons could probably destroy the entire colony with a single coordinated attack. The defensive platforms would not even slow them down if they decided to open fire, Roy immediately ordered all civilians to the underground shelters that had been prepared for emergencies. Families grabbed their children and essential supplies while running for the reinforced bunkers that had been carved into the bedrock beneath the colony. The streets filled with people moving quickly but without panic as the evacuation procedures they had practiced many times before took effect. The orbital defense platforms powered up their weapons and prepared to make their last stand against impossible odds. The crews knew they could not win against 300 enemy warships, but they would sell their lives as dearly as possible to buy time for the civilians below. The patrol ships launched from the surface and took defensive positions around the planet. Even though their small guns would be useless against the alien fleet, Lisa managed to send one final message toward human space before the aliens jammed all communications from the planet. The distress signal contained all the information they had gathered about the enemy fleet, including ship designs and weapon signatures. She hoped some other human settlement would receive the warning and be better prepared than New Haven had been for this attack. Crickstar watched the human defensive preparations with amusement. The tiny weapon platforms were charging their particle cannons as if they could actually damage Zephyrian shields. The patrol craft that rose from the planet looked like toys compared to his massive battleships. These humans showed courage, but courage without strength was just another word for stupidity in his experience. The 30-minute deadline passed without a surrender from the colony. Crickstar gave the order to begin the bombardment of the human defenses while keeping the civilian areas intact for later occupation. Quantum energy beams lanced out from his ships and struck the orbital platforms one by one. The human weapons fired back desperately, but their attacks were absorbed harmlessly by the Zephyrian shields. Captain Ben Hayes was reviewing patrol reports in his ready room when the distress signal reached the UES Defiance. The message was badly damaged by interference, but the key information came through clearly. New Haven was under attack by an unknown alien fleet, and they needed immediate assistance. Ben had been patrolling the outer colonies for 6 months without seeing any real action, and this was exactly the kind of situation his ship had been built to handle. The UES Defiance was the newest warship in the human fleet and represented 20 years of advances in military technology. The ship was 800 meters long with a sleek design that looked nothing like the boxy cargo haulers most people associated with human space travel. Every system on board had been built from the ground up using lessons learned from previous conflicts and theoretical research into advanced warfare. Ben called his senior officers to the bridge as the ship changed course toward New Haven. The journey would take 18 hours at maximum speed, but every minute could make the difference between saving the colony and arriving too late to help. Ben had spent 15 years fighting pirates and raiders in the outer systems, and he knew that alien attackers would likely be far more dangerous than any human enemy. Chief Engineer Amy Chun reported from the engine room that all systems were running at peak efficiency. The Defiance used a revolutionary hybrid drive that combined fusion reactors with antimatter containment fields to produce incredible amounts of power. The ship could accelerate faster and maintain higher speeds than any previous human vessel while still having enough energy left over for weapons and shields. Amy had designed most of the propulsion system herself after studying captured alien technology from border skirmishes. The engineering principles were sound, but no one had ever tried to build something this advanced before. The Defiance was essentially a prototype that had been rushed into service when intelligence reports suggested major threats were developing. In unexplored space. Weapons Officer Carl Johnson ran diagnostics on all combat systems as they traveled toward the crisis. The Defiance carried an arsenal that would have been impossible to imagine just 10 years earlier. The main guns were electromagnetic railguns that could fire solid projectiles at 12% of light speed. Secondary weapons included plasma cannons and experimental, gravitational torpedoes that warped space itself around their targets. Carl had been skeptical about some of the more exotic weapons when he first came aboard, but testing had proven their effectiveness against every type of defense they could simulate. The railguns in particular seemed almost too simple to be revolutionary, but the physics were undeniable. Nothing could withstand the impact of dense metal moving at relativistic speeds. Commander Lisa Gray coordinated the ship's advanced computer systems and electronic warfare capabilities. The Defiance carried artificial intelligence programs that could process information and make tactical decisions faster than any human crew. The AI was not truly self-aware, but it could analyze enemy movements and suggest responses in milliseconds rather than minutes. Lisa had worked with military intelligence for 8 years before joining the Defiance crew. She understood how important information warfare had become in modern conflicts. The ability to disrupt enemy communications and computer systems could be just as valuable as traditional weapons in determining the outcome of a battle. Sensor operator Pete Davis monitored long-range scanners as they approached the New Haven system. The readings he was getting defied everything he thought he knew about starship design and construction. The alien vessels showed energy signatures that were completely unlike human technology, and their formation patterns suggested military doctrine that was both advanced and aggressive. Pete had been tracking ships and space phenomena for 12 years, but these readings were unlike anything in the databases. The enemy fleet consisted of over 200 large vessels with power outputs that suggested weapons and shields far beyond current human capabilities. The situation at New Haven looked hopeless unless the Defiance could somehow even the odds. Ben studied the tactical situation as his ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The alien fleet had surrounded New Haven and was systematically destroying the orbital defense platforms while staying well away from the populated areas on the surface. This suggested they wanted to capture the colony intact rather than simply wiping out all human presence. The enemy ships were unlike anything Ben had seen in 15 years of military service. They looked like massive crystal spears that gleamed with internal light and moved through space with graceful precision. Each vessel was larger than the Defiance, and their formation showed the discipline of a professional military force with centuries of experience. Amy reported that the alien ships seemed to be using some form of energy shield technology that bent electromagnetic radiation around their hulls. The defensive systems looked incredibly advanced, but they appeared to be designed primarily to stop energy-based attacks rather than physical projectiles. This gave Ben an idea that might just save the colony. Carl confirmed that all weapon systems were ready and the railgun batteries were charged for maximum impact. The gravitational torpedoes were armed and the plasma cannons were standing by for close-range combat. The Defiance was outnumbered by more than 200 to 1, but Ben had learned long ago that numbers meant nothing if you could control the terms of engagement. Lisa activated the ship's stealth systems as they moved closer to the alien fleet. The Defiance used a combination of electromagnetic dampening and gravitational masking that made them nearly invisible to most types of sensors. The technology was experimental, but it had worked perfectly during testing. and this would be its first real combat application. Pete guided them through the asteroid field that surrounded the outer system using passive sensors only. The rocks and debris would help hide their approach while giving them multiple firing positions if they needed to change location quickly. The alien fleet seemed focused entirely on the planet and had not deployed any picket ships to watch for approaching threats. Ben realized that the enemy commander was making a classic mistake by assuming that no significant human forces were in the area. The aliens had probably chosen this target specifically because it seemed isolated and poorly defended. They were about to learn that humans had a habit of appearing in unexpected places at the worst possible times. The Defiance reached optimal firing position just as the last orbital defense platform exploded under alien bombardment. Ben could see the evacuation ships rising from the planet's surface carrying civilian refugees, while the remaining patrol craft tried desperately to buy them time. The colony had maybe an hour before the aliens moved to the next phase of their attack. Ben gave the order to power up all weapons and prepare for combat. The Defiance dropped its stealth systems and accelerated toward the alien fleet, with every gun aimed at the largest enemy vessel. Carl locked onto the command ship and prepared to fire the main railgun battery at point-blank range. Lisa activated the cyber warfare systems and prepared to jam alien communications. The battle for New Haven was about to begin. The first railgun salvo from the UES Defiance struck Admiral Crickstar's flagship without warning. The solid metal projectiles traveling at 12% of light speed punched through the Zephyrian quantum shields like they were made of paper. The alien defensive systems had been designed to deflect energy weapons and particle beams, but they were completely useless against dense matter moving at relativistic velocities. Crickstar felt his ship shudder as the human projectiles tore through 3 decks and exploded out the other side. Alarm signals filled the bridge as damage reports poured in from all sections. The quantum shield generators were offline and hull breaches were venting atmosphere into space. In 30 years of combat, the Admiral had never seen shields fail so completely against what appeared to be simple kinetic weapons. The alien crew scrambled to understand what had happened as more human projectiles struck ships throughout the fleet. The Zephyrian vessels had been arranged in a tight formation to maximize their firepower against the planet, but this made them perfect targets for the Defiance's railgun batteries. Carl Johnson methodically worked his way through the enemy formation, destroying one ship after another with precise shots that ignored every defense the aliens possessed. Ben Hayes watched the tactical display with satisfaction as his single ship carved through the enemy fleet like a knife through soft tissue. The aliens were clearly stunned by the effectiveness of human weapons, and their formation was already starting to break apart as individual captains tried to maneuver away from the devastating attack. The Defiance used its superior speed and agility to stay ahead of the alien response while maintaining optimal firing angles. Amy Chun monitored the ship's power systems as they pushed the hybrid drive to its limits. The combination of fusion and antimatter containment was producing more energy than any human ship had ever generated before, and every system on board was running at peak efficiency. The revolutionary propulsion design allowed them to accelerate and change direction faster than ships 3 times smaller while maintaining full power to weapons and shields. Commander Lisa Gray launched her cyber warfare attack against the alien communication networks and watched with amazement as their systems proved vulnerable to human computer viruses. The Zephyrian fleet used quantum entanglement for instantaneous communication, but their network protocols had obvious weaknesses that could be exploited by anyone who understood basic information theory. Within minutes, she had introduced chaos into their command structure. The alien ships began firing at each other as corrupted targeting data caused their weapon systems to identify fellow Zephyrians as enemies. Lisa's program spread through their network like a plague, infecting every ship that tried to coordinate with the fleet command. The disciplined formation that had seemed so threatening just minutes before dissolved into confused groups of vessels shooting in random directions. Pete Davis tracked the movement of enemy ships as they tried desperately to reorganize their attack. The aliens were clearly experienced warriors, but they had never faced an opponent who fought with such unconventional methods. Their tactical doctrine assumed that enemies would use similar technology and follow predictable patterns of engagement. The human approach seemed to violate every rule of civilized warfare. Admiral Crickstar screamed orders at his communications officer, trying to regain control of the situation, but half his fleet was no longer responding to commands. The human cyber attack had corrupted their targeting systems, and several of his ships were firing on their own escorts. The single enemy vessel continued to tear through his formation with weapons that should not have been able to penetrate Zephyrian shields. The admiral finally got a clear look at the human warship as it destroyed another of his battlecruisers with a single devastating salvo. The enemy vessel was smaller than most Zephyrian ships, but it moved with incredible grace and speed. Its hull design was completely unlike anything in their databases, and its weapon signatures defied analysis by their best scientists. These humans were far more dangerous than intelligence reports had suggested. Carl Johnson switched to the experimental gravitational torpedoes as the enemy fleet began to spread out beyond optimal railgun range. The new weapons created localized distortions in space-time that crushed enemy ships from the inside out. Zephyrian's shields and armor were designed to stop external attacks, but they provided no protection against weapons that warped reality itself around their targets. The first gravitational torpedo struck a Zephyrian destroyer, and the results exceeded even Carl's expectations. The weapon created a micro-black hole that lasted for only milliseconds, but the gravitational shear tore the alien ship apart at the molecular level. The destroyer simply ceased to exist in a brief flash of exotic radiation that confused every sensor in the system. The other alien vessels nearby fled in terror as they watched matter itself being destroyed, then ordered the Defiance to pursue the retreating alien ships while continuing to fire at every opportunity. The human warship had destroyed over 50 enemy vessels in the first 10 minutes of combat, and the rest of the fleet was already trying to escape toward the edge of the system. The Zephyrians had clearly never faced an opponent capable of matching their technology and exceeding their tactical flexibility. Lisa expanded her cyber warfare attack to target the alien hyperspace drives, hoping to prevent their escape. The Zephyrian jump systems used quantum mechanics that were similar to human faster-than-light technology, and she was able to introduce instabilities that caused several ships to explode when they tried to enter hyperspace. The enemy fleet was trapped in normal space with a human opponent they could not defeat or escape. Amy pushed the engines harder as they chased down the fleeing aliens while maintaining power to all weapon systems. The hybrid drive was performing perfectly under combat conditions, and she made mental notes about improvements that could be implemented in future ship designs. The Defiance was proving that human engineering could compete with any technology in the galaxy when properly applied to military problems. Admiral Crickstar watched his once mighty fleet reduced to scattered survivors desperately trying to reach the system's edge before the human ship could destroy them all. Less than half his vessels remained operational, and many of those were badly damaged by weapons they could not defend against. The single human warship had accomplished what should have been impossible and turned a routine conquest into a complete disaster. The alien commander finally understood that humanity represented something entirely new in the galaxy. These mammals did not fight according to established rules or use predictable technology. They combined scientific innovation with tactical thinking in ways that made them far more dangerous than their small numbers suggested. The Zephyrian Empire would have to completely reevaluate the threat these creatures represented. Captain Ben Hayes opened a communication channel to the New Haven colony as the last alien ships fled into hyperspace. Jake Morrison's face appeared on the screen, and the relief in his eyes was obvious as he realized his people had been saved. The battle was over, but both men knew this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict that would determine the future of human expansion into space. The surviving Zephyrian ships limped away from New Haven carrying news that would shake the foundation of their empire. Admiral Crickstar sat in his damaged command center watching the impossible readings on his tactical displays. A single human Warship had destroyed two-thirds of his fleet using weapons and tactics that defied everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about warfare. The mammals were not the primitive species they appeared to be. Captain Ben Hayes established orbit around New Haven and opened communication channels with the other human colonies in the region. The distress signals that had been reaching the planet for weeks suddenly made sense as reports came in of similar alien attacks throughout the sector. The Zephyrian Empire had launched a coordinated assault against human space, but they had not expected to encounter serious resistance from their intended victims. Dr. Lisa Parker emerged from the underground shelters with the rest of the civilian population and immediately began analyzing the wreckage of alien ships floating in orbit. The debris contained technology that was centuries ahead of human science in some areas, but surprisingly primitive in others. The Zephyrians had focused on energy weapons and defensive shields while neglecting the kind of kinetic weapons that humans had developed for space combat. Jake Morrison coordinated the rescue efforts as emergency teams searched through the damaged orbital platforms looking for survivors. The alien attack had been devastating, but the arrival of the Defiants had prevented the complete destruction of the colony's defenses. Most of the civilian population had survived unharmed in their underground shelters, and the settlement itself had suffered only minor damage from falling debris. Amy Chun worked with the colony's engineers to repair critical systems while transmitting technical data about the Defiance's propulsion and weapon systems to other human military units. The hybrid fusion antimatter drive was revolutionary, but it could be mass-produced using existing manufacturing facilities. Within months, every human warship could be equipped with engines that would give them a decisive advantage over alien technology. Commander Lisa Gray established a secure communication network linking all human colonies in the region and began sharing the cyber warfare techniques she had developed during the battle. The Zephyrian fleet had proven vulnerable to computer viruses and electronic attacks despite their advanced technology. Human programmers throughout the sector began developing new ways to exploit these weaknesses. The Zephyrian High Command received Admiral Crickstar's report with disbelief and anger. The humans had destroyed a fleet that should have been capable of conquering entire star systems using weapons that appeared to violate the known laws of physics. The Empire's greatest scientists were ordered to analyze the battle data and determine how such primitive creatures had developed such devastating military capabilities. Emperor Zixthal himself reviewed the tactical recordings of the battle and watched in horror as human weapons tore through Zephyrian shields like they were made of tissue paper. The mammals moved their ships with impossible speed and fired projectiles that traveled at significant fractions of light speed. The single human vessel had fought like something out of ancient legends rather than modern warfare. Ben Hayes met with the other human fleet commanders, who had responded to the crisis and began coordinating a defensive strategy that would protect all colonies in the region. The Zephyrians would certainly return in greater numbers once they understood the threat that humanity represented, but the humans would be ready for them. Every world would be defended by ships equipped with the latest weapons and defensive systems. Carl Johnson trained other weapons officers in the use of railguns and gravitational torpedoes while human shipyards rushed to produce the exotic munitions these weapons required. The kinetic projectiles were relatively simple to manufacture, but they required precise timing and incredible accuracy to be effective against fast-moving targets. The gravitational weapons were more complex, but their ability to ignore conventional defenses made them invaluable. Pete Davis worked with sensor operators throughout the human fleet to develop new detection methods that could track ships using Zephyrian stealth technology. The aliens relied on energy manipulation to hide their vessels, but human sensors could be modified to detect the gravitational distortions created by their advanced drives. No alien ship would be able to approach a human colony undetected again. The news of humanity's victory at New Haven spread throughout both human and alien space within days. Other species that had been conquered by the Zephyrian Empire began to whisper about the mammals who had defeated an entire invasion fleet with a single warship. Some began to hope that the 1,000-year reign of terror might finally be coming to an end if these humans were strong enough to challenge the Empire. Dr. Lisa Parker published her analysis of Zephyrian technology and revealed that the aliens had followed a completely different path of scientific development than humans. They had mastered energy manipulation and quantum mechanics but had never seriously developed kinetic weapons or information warfare. This had made them incredibly vulnerable to human tactics that combined old-fashioned physics with cutting-edge computer science. Admiral Crickstar faced execution for his failure, but the Zephyrian High Command decided his experience was too valuable to waste. Instead, he was ordered to lead a new research program designed to understand human capabilities and develop countermeasures. The Empire began rushing new ship designs into production that incorporated lessons learned from their devastating defeat. At New Haven, Captain Ben Hayes received orders to take the Defiance on a tour of human colonies to demonstrate the new weapon systems and train other crews in their use. Every world in human space would need to be defended as the conflict with the Zephyrian Empire escalated. The aliens would return with larger fleets and better preparation, but humanity would be ready for whatever they brought to the fight. The battle at New Haven became known as the day humanity announced its arrival on the galactic stage. The Zephyrians had expected to find weak prey that could be easily conquered and enslaved, but instead they had encountered an enemy that fought with weapons they could not defend against and tactics they could not predict. The screeches of terror that filled alien communication channels during the battle became a warning that echoed throughout the galaxy. Jake Morrison stood at his office window watching the reconstruction efforts as his people rebuilt their world. Stronger than before, new defense platforms were rising from the planet's surface, equipped with railguns and gravitational weapons that could stop any alien fleet. The quiet colony had become the first battlefield in a war that would determine whether humanity would be conquered or become conquerors themselves in the vast darkness between the stars.